Welcome to the fourth and final season of Conversations with Glen Taylor. This season looks at a few unique stories that didn't fit into the first three seasons, but are absolutely worth telling. This episode covers the creation of Golden Heart Child Care Center. Golden Heart was founded in 1980, when Gene Anderson presented an idea to Glen that has since impacted more than 1,400 children and countless families.
When we had some employees come to management and said, we're having problems with child care. And the question is, what do you mean by that? We can't get employees. Employees have child care problems. They have to quit. It's just really, really difficult.
Glen had a problem being in the wedding stationery business, and the people that were helping run that were women that were crucial to the business. And they were saying, geez, I'm going to go home and have, a child or two. And, geez, I can't afford to lose you. And so really what it was, how do I set up something? And you think about even calling it Golden Heart. It's the center of the body, and everything else is built around, the campus is built around that. It is so far ahead of its time. It was just unbelievable.
Gene Anderson was in my office. I was telling Jean that I wanted her to take on more responsibility, basically to be kind of like a manager of a department. And she says, I really would like to do that. I really would enjoy doing that. But she says, Glen, it's just not practical because I have a child and I need to be home at certain times, and you like to have your manager stay until you finish the job.
I can remember maybe one of my first conversations with Glen was when I presented the idea and did the proposal for Golden Heart. I put together this whole proposal and did a lot of research on it because I had a daughter, not in school yet. It was like I had like 3 or 4 babysitters because I was working full time. We both were.
From that conversation, I said, let me look into it. I talked to my brother Larry, and we decided that we needed to build a child care center, not only for Jean and her child, but all the men and women who had children and wanted to move into management.
My first introduction was Jean and Larry had called and asked about licensing for childcare when I was working elsewhere. Just they knew I was in childcare and knew about the licensing. So that was my first introduction, and then it developed into the childcare center. And I started when it was not even had a floor in it yet. So there were several of us unpacking boxes and getting ready for the opening.
Because of the hours we worked and needed coverage, we came to the conclusion the best way is we had to own and run it ourselves so we could meet the needs of our employees. That came first. And so we put together a proposal on how it could be done and some costs, and then Glen met with the supervisors. And the question, we talked about it, would you think this would really help you in your hiring? And keep in mind, if we make the commitment to the child care center, and we're going to be subsidizing it, and money gets tight, it goes there first before we buy equipment, because we've made the commitment to the employees and the employees' children. And it was not 100% in favor, but almost 100%, well, upper 90s.
From what information I have from various centers is they did expect a break-even point within 5 or 10 years. Taylor has never expected that. That 50-60% subsidy keeps going even today. So that's the important part of keeping the staff, keeping the center as good in quality as it is, and it's important for the whole community to know how much they value childcare.
That was one of the things that I thought was really, really important for our organization, is to give women an opportunity to feel okay and at ease when you're working, because not knowing who's taking care of your children and just knowing you could run across the street if you needed to and go back, it was amazing.
It was so heart-filling for me as a new mom and as a mom as I progressed with my other two children to know that I was supported as an individual and as a mom and someone who wants a career, right?
When we finally opened, we were a little late in our starting time, but Holly Anderson, Jean's daughter, was one of the first children, as was Ryan Schreier.
So if I was going to be fair to the women in our organization and give them the same opportunity that the men had to move up in management, and Jean was a leader, and from that, many more other outstanding women have moved up in our organization. But I give the credit to Jean. She was the one that kind of stimulated that idea.
So it's a 1-to-4 ratio in infants, 1-to-7 in toddlers, and 1-to-10 in preschool. What you don't stop to realize is you don't have 1-to-4 all day long, and we're open from 6:30 to 6. So in the morning you've got 1 or 2, and then they develop up and your staffing goes according to that. And the evening, the same thing. You have them going home in different steps. So, yep, that's the ratio, but you can't base your budget on 1-to-4, 1-to-7, and 1-to-10, because that doesn't work.
Golden Heart was the first corporate child care center in Minnesota, and one of the first in the entire nation. It was definitely ahead of its time. I asked Glen and others how Golden Heart impacted employees with families, as well as the impact it had on the organization as a whole. Taylor continues to subsidize Golden Heart to this day, as the child care center now welcomes a third generation of Golden Heart kids.
The favorite part is always the children. You enjoy watching them grow, you enjoy seeing them change, and as they're getting ready to go off to kindergarten and what they have to say about where they're going to go for the rest of their life.
The thing that was really fun was the number of employees that didn't have children there, but wanted to bring their family and friends over to show them, this is the kind of company I work for, that cares about the employees and their needs. And so even though they weren't utilizing it, would never utilize it, they were very, very proud to be working for a company that had a child care center for the employees, because we were a rarity. This is 42 years ago. 1980 when we opened up.
So one of the things that happened once we got going is Senator Dernberger asked me if I would go out to Washington with him and to a hearing on child care. And I did that. And that was a great experience for me to be in front of the senators and have them ask me questions. And I think if I recall that session with those senators, I think the main thing that was scaring businesses off was the insurance part, or death of a child at that they would be held liability. And I think it took a long time for the Senate or the Congress to find solutions to that problem of what happens if something really terrible happened at your daycare.
It was a business issue. And, you know, over the years, when Glen testified at the U.S. Congress, testified at Minnesota legislature, talking about the importance from a business perspective to do this for employees, Craig, that's, 20, 30 years ahead of everybody else, what came on. So really a pioneer in that arena.
He was very, very supportive of having women have a place to take their children and give women a chance to grow in our organization. And I'll never forget that. And it was one of the best things he ever did for our organization at that time. It was great.
The other part of the dedication to childcare was during the pandemic, they allowed parents who were at home to keep their children out of the center and guaranteed them time to come back. So as long as they were out for a full month or 3 months or more, just had to let us know when they were ready to come back, and then we would staff accordingly. That's pretty big dedication for no cost to the parent who is maybe working from home, maybe laid off for a while during the pandemic. There's all kinds of impacts that the pandemic had, but there are no other centers that I am aware of that allowed parents to withdraw and guaranteed them a spot back.
Kind of one of the funny things that Larry has passed along to me. He says, we have the children, this was at the beginning when we were just starting, when they come into the daycare, they have little punch-in cards that look like time cards. So he says, we're teaching them right off that this is part of their job to come to work and stuff like that. So he loved to tell that story.
That was one of the most beautiful things I think that Glen has done for his employees, was to create that daycare center, where I then have my grandchildren went through there, and my last grandchild just graduated from there. So I not only had all 3 of my sons go to Golden Heart, then I ended up having 2 of my grandchildren go through Golden Heart, and that place is very, very dear to my heart and will always be.
I talked to so many people across the country representing Taylor, Fortune 500 companies, and go back out, and one of the stories I love telling about is the start of Golden Heart. And it's not only the start of it, why it started for a business purpose, but what it's meant to our employees and our employees' families. And then saying, you know, we have employees now that went there as children and their children are there. Well, now we're getting ready to start the 3rd generation, which I just think is really remarkable.
There was a guy and a gal that were dating in college, and they had both attended Golden Heart. And it was on a weekend, and they driving by, and he said something about, well, geez, they made some changes, some new playgrounds, so let's stop. And so they did a walk around the center and came back to the front, and then they were talking, and she was looking some way, and she turned around, and he was down on his knees with an engagement ring for her. He says, this is where I first saw you, right here on this spot. This is where they first met, at Golden Heart. So, yeah, it's fun. Golden Heart's been, having a bad day, just walk over there.